For 4 years, my wife was a peaceful harbor in my disciplined military life. But what I trusted most began to crack. The woman I loved, the woman I believed in, now lied with weak voices and fake smiles. Possessions disappeared, words flowed smoothly like a script, and she remained suspiciously calm. Was it all an elaborate play, or a battle I hadn't realized I'd entered? How do I get justice when the enemy knows all your weaknesses and is chuckling behind a mask of love? I am Jabat bin Idris, 48 years old, and a military major. My entire life has been a straight line drawn by discipline, orders, and honor, intertwined with barbed wire fences, training grounds, and marches in the rain. For a child who grew up without much to rely on, the Army gave me a family, a solid foundation to lean on. I believe in order, in clear rules, and I built my entire life on that foundation. The rigidity of military life needed a counterbalance. And 4 years ago, I found that in Kirana. She was 42, with a gentle, quiet demeanor, a complete contrast to my world of shouts and commands. Our life in the officers' quarters flowed quietly, without fuss or fanfare. I fulfilled my duties at the unit, and she was the peaceful haven waiting for me at home, sometimes taking on translation jobs to stave off boredom. I thought that peace would last forever, but about 6 months ago, it began to crack, starting with the smallest fissures. It all began with Kirana's migraines. Initially, it was just soft complaints about headaches, times she closed her eyes and massaged her temples. I didn't pay much attention, but then the headaches became more frequent, turning into an invisible phantom that drained her energy. Kirana started skipping meals, losing weight, and nameless anxieties would strike in the middle of the night, making her sit up, gasping for air. The woman who was once the embodiment of tranquility now feared the silence of the night itself. The helplessness gnawed at me daily. Many times I would come home to find her lying motionless, her eyes lost as if drawn into some void. I could endure the pressure of the battlefield, but seeing that, I could do nothing. Last night, after she startled awake again, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. This morning I took her to the military hospital. I sat in the waiting room, my hands still clasped tightly as if holding a rifle. Questions spun in my head. What kind of illness is this? Is it just a common headache? Or is there something else I haven't seen? I don't believe in chance. Everything has a cause, and my duty is to find it, even if I have to turn over every stone. The results from the military hospital came quickly, but they didn't bring the relief I hoped for. Kirana was diagnosed with anxiety disorder and chronic migraines. The doctors said these conditions could last a lifetime, manageable but not curable. It sounded reasonable, a scientific explanation for everything that was happening. The doctor prescribed new medication and advised absolute rest. Kirana's condition visibly worsened. She completely quit her translation work, saying she couldn't look at a screen for more than 5 minutes. She stayed in bed almost all day. Even the light filtering through the curtains was enough to make her wince. Our house fell into a heavy silence, broken only occasionally by a soft moan from the bedroom. The burden weighed on my shoulders, both at home and at the unit. Paperwork piled up. My mind was sometimes not in the meeting room, and that did not escape the notice of Colonel Rahman, my superior. "Are you all right, Jabat?" he asked directly during a moment when it was just the two of us. "Just family matters, Colonel. I have it under control," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Report if you need assistance." He said only that, then patted my shoulder. A soldier doesn't explain, and he understood that. But deep down, I knew adjusting wouldn't be so easy. One afternoon I came home early. As I stepped through the door, I heard Kirana talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was clear, full of energy, even a giggle. I froze. That wasn't the voice of a sick person. The conversation abruptly stopped when she saw me enter. She startled, quickly coughed, her hand gripping the phone tightly. "Oh, it's you. You scared me. Just a wrong number." Then she suddenly slumped onto the chair, returning to her usual weak demeanor. I wanted to ask more, but my concern for her illness made me overlook it, at least at that moment. A few weeks later, my vintage car, my father's heirloom, something I cared for more than my weapons, disappeared from the garage. I turned everything upside down. When I asked Kirana, she just looked at me with dreamy eyes, shaking her head. "I don't know. Maybe it was stolen." Her voice was too calm for a large asset to have vanished without a trace. Then my savings account. Years of money saved to renovate my parents' house back home was completely emptied. That evening, I sat down by the bed, trying to stay calm, and told Kirana. Her reaction wasn't shock or anger. She took my hand, her eyes welling up, and then uttered empty philosophical platitudes. "Money is just external, dear. What matters is that we still have each other." That sentence, the way she said it, it was too smooth, too fake. It wasn't comfort. It was a pre-written script. I didn't sleep that night. I looked at the woman lying beside me, listening to her steady breaths. Each small detail, if standing alone, could be seen as a coincidence, but when they lined up, they formed a different picture, twisted and dark. For the first time in 4 years, I looked at my wife and wasn't sure who I was seeing. Suspicion, once it takes root, grows faster than any weed. I needed more information. A few days later, I used the excuse of taking Kirana for a follow-up appointment. She was taken for more tests. I waited as usual, until Dr. Azima, an elderly female doctor with graying hair and a serious face, personally invited me into a private room. She closed the door, placed a file on the table, her eyes sharp, as if evaluating me. Dr. Azima invited me to sit, then went straight to the point. Her voice was low and decisive. "Major, I need to tell you something very important. I recognize your wife, Kirana." I frowned slightly. Recognize? What did she mean? Dr. Azima continued, her voice dropping. "I was not her doctor. But many years ago, when I was still working at a civilian hospital, I treated her ex-husband. Her every word was like a bullet lodging in my mind. He came to me in a state of mental collapse and severe depression," she continued, her voice full of empathy, but also very clear. During therapy, he recounted his entire story. He was defrauded of everything by his own wife, Kirana. She faked a serious illness, manipulating him psychologically day by day, making him pour all his money and assets into her. When I heard you describe your wife's current symptoms, they match alarmingly. The room fell silent. I didn't move, just looked directly into her trembling eyes behind her glasses. Dr. Azima took a breath, then continued, "Major, ethically, I am bound by confidentiality. But my former patient, he completely collapsed, lost all faith, and never recovered. The haunting memory of that devastation doesn't allow me to remain silent again. Moreover, you are an officer, a protector of the country. I cannot turn a blind eye when someone like you is so cruelly entrapped. This is my conscience, overriding conventional rules." She paused, her voice hoarse. "This is not just professional duty. This is my conscience." I stood up, nodding decisively at her. "Thank you, doctor." I said nothing more. The feeling at that moment wasn't pain, but a coldness to the bone. The twisted picture in my head last night now had a name. Fraud. The misplaced pieces had been perfectly reassembled by an intelligence report that couldn't be more accurate. When I stepped out of the office, Kirana was waiting outside, her face still wearing a pitifully tired expression. She looked at me and asked, "What did the doctor say, dear?" I looked directly into her eyes, seeing through that perfect mask for the first time, and replied only in a terrifyingly calm voice. Nothing important. Let's go home. My mission had changed. It was no longer about caring for a patient. It was about exposing an enemy. On the way home, Kirana still leaned on my shoulder, but I only felt a block of ice. The game had changed. I was no longer a worried husband. I was an officer, on a mission. This mission wasn't in any training manual, nor was it ordered by any superior, but it was the most important of my life. To unmask the woman who had been by my side for 4 years. That very evening, I went online and ordered several miniature surveillance cameras. They were disguised as ordinary objects, an alarm clock, a phone charger. When they arrived, I waited until Kirana was resting in the bedroom and proceeded to install them. My every action was precise and silent. One in the living room, facing the sofa where she often lay. One in the kitchen, and the last one, in a hidden corner of our bedroom. I didn't want to see a patient. I wanted to see the true person living under this roof. I continued to play the devoted husband. But now, every night, after making sure Kirana was sound asleep, I retreated to my study. Inserting the memory card into my computer, what I saw was even worse than what Dr. Azima had warned. Kirana's act was perfect. As soon as the sound of my car engine faded, the woman who was too sick to stand up immediately sprang out of bed. She moved nimbly, turned on music, and even danced to the tunes while making coffee. All signs of illness vanished as if they had never existed. Then she picked up her phone, her voice clear, cheerful, and every word cut like a knife. "Don't worry, he believes every word," she chuckled, her voice full of contempt. "What does a soldier know? He just follows orders." That's right. Just a little longer and I can break free from this boring life. I sat stunned in front of the screen. The evidence was too clear. The pains, the anxieties, the late-night tears, all just an act. This recording was evidence. But I needed more. I needed something tangible. Something I could put on an interrogation table. The suspicion about the car fueled me. How did she get it? The spare key. I always kept it in a commemorative wooden box, along with my medals and military memorabilia. That wooden box was still untouched in the wardrobe, covered with a thin layer of dust. A glimmer of hope. Could I have been wrong? One evening, while Kirana was asleep, I quietly opened the wooden box. Most of the medals were still there, but my heart sank when I realized the most prominent spot in the box was empty. The Medal of Valor, the most precious keepsake of my career, was gone. I trembled as I lifted the velvet lining at the bottom of the box. The spare key was also gone. I followed the trail and finally found a crumpled receipt hidden in a drawer. Wrinkled, but still clearly bearing Kirana's signature. Content. Selling my vintage car to a junkyard. I collapsed onto the floor, the crumpled paper in my hand. Everything was over. She hadn't just sold the car. She had sold it as scrap metal. She had discarded my memories, my love, my father's heirloom for a paltry sum without hesitation. Her mocking voice in the recording echoed in my head, mixing with the image of the receipt. She hadn't just deceived me. She disrespected me, trampled on my honor, and crushed even the most sacred things. This betrayal hurt more than any wound I had ever sustained on the battlefield. After that night, there wasn't a shred of doubt left in me. What I saw, heard, held in my hand, it was enough to end any play. Trust, love, patience, all had turned to ashes. Only one thing remained: determination. Military discipline had trained me to turn emotions into action. And now, I had a mission to complete. The next day, I didn't go to work. I called Colonel Rahman, saying only briefly, "Colonel, I need a day off for an urgent personal matter." No questions were asked. The first thing I did was make multiple copies of all the evidence. The videos, audio files, images of the receipt. Everything was carefully stored on a USB drive. Next, I wrote out the divorce papers, word by word, clearly and decisively. Finally, I drove to the military police headquarters. I presented the entire situation to the officer on duty succinctly, without emotion, like reporting a mission. I handed him the USB drive. I spoke briefly, clearly, letting no emotion interfere. This is not just financial fraud. This is intentional deception, psychological manipulation, and exploitation of a military officer's status. He examined the evidence, his face gradually becoming serious. After a few calls, he turned to me. "Major, we will send 2 men with you back home." I hadn't asked for it, but I understood. This was no longer a family matter. It was a criminal case. When we arrived home, Kirana was sprawled on the sofa watching TV, her face pale, her breathing heavy. As soon as she saw me enter with 2 uniformed military police officers, her expression instantly changed. But only for a moment. She was a skilled actress. Her surprised face quickly turned to fright and self-pity. She began to act. "Jabat, what is this? Why did you bring them home?" She sobbed, turning to the officers. "You see my husband. He's putting pressure on a sick wife." She cried, trying to manipulate even the law enforcement officers, painting a picture of a cruel husband and a weak, pitiful wife. Her act was so perfect that one of the 2 young officers seemed slightly flustered. I didn't say a word. I just quietly pulled out my phone and pressed play. Kirana's healthy, mocking voice echoed through the silent room. "Don't worry. He believes every word. What does a soldier know? He just follows orders." The subsequent chuckle rang out, raw and exposed. Kirana froze. The fake tears suddenly solidified on her face. From an expression of distress, it turned into absolute horror. I looked directly into her eyes, pulled the receipt and the divorce papers from my pocket, and placed them on the bed. My voice was calm, decisive, as if giving a marching order. "Your act is over." An officer stepped forward, his voice firm. "Kirana binti Abdullah, you are under arrest for investigation of fraud and theft of property." She didn't resist, just sat stiffly like a shattered statue. As they handcuffed her, she turned to look at me, her eyes no longer feigned, but filled with raw hatred. I stood still, watching as they escorted Kirana away. No screams, no excuses. Only absolute silence remained. And in that silence, I knew I had just closed the darkest chapter of my life. The door closed behind Kirana, leaving a vast emptiness in the house and in my heart. But I wouldn't allow myself to crumble. There was still one final battle to fight. The legal battle. The matter didn't end within the walls of my home. Once it touched the honor of an officer, it was immediately brought before the military court. During the subsequent investigation, the military police discovered that Kirana had not only sold the car, but had also secretly pawned my Medal of Valor at a pawn shop. This was no longer a family matter. It was an act that infringed upon military security and honor. I did not attend the hearings. My mission ended when I submitted the evidence. I had no desire to see her face again. No wish to hear her final lies. I only read the reports through official channels. In court, Kirana and her lawyer attempted to build a final defense. Before the tribunal, Kirana sat properly, her face pale but her eyes still trying to maintain a pitiful expression. Her lawyer argued that all actions occurred in an unstable mental state. that illness rendered her incapable of control. But that play was quickly brought down. The military prosecutor presented all the evidence. Videos showed her healthy, dancing in the kitchen. Then the audio recording. The contemptuous chuckle, "What does a soldier know?" echoed throughout the room. Next were the bank statements, proving the savings had been completely withdrawn. Then the car sale receipt, selling my father's heirloom as scrap metal. When the prosecutor held up that paper, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't just evidence. It was a symbol of raw cruelty and deception. Finally, Dr. Azima's testimony. She stood up, her voice clear, recounting Kirana's past and her ex-husband's story. A story that mirrored mine in every detail. There was no room for doubt. The tribunal did not deliberate for long. When the military judge read the verdict, each word resonated like a hammer blow. Kirana is found guilty of fraud and theft, with the aggravating circumstance of exploiting trust to harm the honor of a military serviceman. A severe sentence is imposed, not only for punishment, but also to affirm that a soldier's honor is not something to be trifled with. When I received the official notification, I felt no joy, only a bitter sense of relief. Justice had been served, but the price was my shattered trust. The divorce was finalized. Kirana went to prison. I lost a large sum of money, lost the vintage car, my father's gift, but I still had my career and the honor of a soldier. That was something no one could take away. My life returned to order, but inside, everything was in ruins. The house became too large and too silent. Every corner brought back a false memory. I threw myself into work as a way to escape. I took on extra assignments, participated in training exercises, pushing my body and mind to their limits. Physical exhaustion helped me sleep at night without needing to think. Colonel Rahman and my comrades didn't ask many questions, but they were always there, silently supportive, enough for me to know I wasn't alone. But the scars left behind were invisible. I became more withdrawn. I was more cautious with every word, every gesture, especially with women. I no longer easily gave my trust as before. It wasn't hatred, but self-preservation. An invisible armor I was forced to wear. The good memories with Kirana were now fragments, and I learned to live with them as part of the past, not forgotten, but not allowed to interfere with the present. I stood firm on the foundation of discipline and honor, the things that helped me win this silent battle. But that victory came at a cost. The scar of trust Kirana left was invisible, an armor I was forced to wear every day. Life moved on. I chose my own path, walking straight ahead, never looking back. And this time, I knew what I had to believe in: myself, discipline, and what I could control. I had defeated her, but it seemed that every night I was still losing the battle with the ghost of betrayal. Time passed, and I remained focused on my work and training. But my unit wasn't just a battlefield or a training ground. It was also a place where I saw calm but resolute people, gradually reassuring me in their own way. Captain Isaiah, a young female officer, was one of them. She was professional, intelligent, and possessed a soldier's blunt honesty. I knew her, but only on a professional level. Isaiah never asked about my private life, nor did she show pity. Occasionally, she would simply bring me a cup of coffee when she saw me working late, nod a greeting, and then leave. A subtle, comradely concern. One afternoon, as I was reviewing maps for an upcoming exercise, she approached me. "Major," she began, her voice clear, "this weekend, a few of us are going hiking for physical training. It's not on the official schedule, just a spontaneous activity. Would you like to join? Some fresh air might do you good." Her invitation held no hint of romance. It was a straightforward offer between comrades. I had intended to refuse. My defensive instincts flared, but then I looked at Izia. I saw no calculation in her eyes, only genuine respect. I remained silent for a long moment, long enough for Izia to think I would decline. But in that moment, I realized something. I couldn't let Kirana win. She had taken 4 years of my life. I couldn't let her take the rest. Yes, I heard myself reply, my voice more certain than I expected. What time do we meet? Izia smiled, a light, professional smile. She gave me the time and location and then left. That evening, for the first time in months, the silence in the house no longer felt so heavy. A small glimmer of hope had crept in. I knew the road ahead was long. Learning to trust again was like a grueling march. But after all, I was a soldier. I had never given up. I was ready to start again. 80. 1 second. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn. Enter to jump to it. And escape to return to the chat. Start typing a prompt. Run. Control. Response ready.